It's funny to think back because I think for me, there was definitely a turning point once Allen Iverson came into the picture with Nike. So they signed him in 1996. And while Shaq was popular, one of the things that you had heard over the years and about selling sneakers is that they felt like big men don't necessarily sell shoes. They felt like the shoes are more so structured for them to have the sturdiness of them doing these post moves and stuff like that. And your average kid that's in the driveway, they're trying to replicate what someone like Allen Iverson's trying to do. They're trying to replicate all of these things. But Allen Iverson, of course, in a lot of ways became the embodiment of hip hop culture, at least for the NBA. And I think Reebok eventually did lean into a lot of that. But as you were talking about before we started recording, it's almost like Reebok was a little bit late to that perspective just compared to where some of the other brands were.
Totally. And I think you're right. I mean, the thing about big men don't sell shoes, it's not they don't sell shoes at all, but I think it's kind of that kids want to fly, right? And that's what Nike, especially through Jordan, kind of had the monopoly on. Air, right? Nike Air Jordan. Like you want to be in the air, you want to be flying. I mean, I remember being a little kid, I would try on these new shoes, these Nikes, and they had like the little air bubbles, and I was telling my parents, like, see, it bounces, it makes me fly, it makes me jump higher. It's like, it doesn't make you jump higher. That's ridiculous. But the marketing was so great on it, and I think it was because Nike aligned itself to basketball players who could fly, basically. And Reebok, maybe at least at first with Shaq, was more around the big men. But like you say, they're the D Browns, Dominique Wilkins. So there were some people who could fly in there too. I think maybe Nike just did a better job of selling the flight aspect than Reebok did.
I think Nike did a better job of like selling in general. Like one of the things that people have often said about Nike is that this is a company that excels at marketing. They are selling you marketing. They happen to sell you these products that line up with the marketing, but marketing is what they've done so well at. Thinking about Tiger Woods, Michael Jordan, Serena, all these athletes that they've built up in that way. And while I do think that Reebok had some aspects of that, in a lot of ways, the leadership from the company, at least from some of the research I've done, was a bit more focused on how do we make this company do this thing that it does well in terms of selling shoes. So the vision was almost constrained to a fault in terms of trying to optimize being a good apparel company versus that Nike kind of had this bigger, loftier, big, hairy, ambitious goal that kept it grounded. And even in a way, one of the things that stuck out, one of the CEOs at the time, I think his last name was Fireman, he said something to the extent of even though they were beating Nike, they felt like it wasn't going to be for long because they were focused on trying to just operate a successful apparel company from their Boston, Massachusetts headquarters, and Nike's trying to take over the world.
Yeah, and maybe you could kind of look at it like the focus was how do we sell shoes, and Nike was sort of how do we tell a story, and maybe in some cases the how do we sell shoes, I mean that gets you to sell more shoes, right? But in the long term, the how do we tell the story, how do we make you fly? That's how you win, in the long term, and having that imagination, and I think it's kind of what you did with the names that you had on board, right? It wasn't necessarily who you had, although having Michael Jordan, like that's kind of hard to beat. But how do you tell the story of those athletes that you have, and specifically how do you connect it more and more to hip hop, which was becoming, already like one of the dominant aspects of global culture. And I think as the years went on, Reebok tried, but it was almost a little bit too late. But that didn't mean that they didn't do some interesting and experimental things.
Yeah, I think some of the stuff they did made sense, and I almost feel like AI benefited from it a bit more than maybe Shaq did. I feel like Shaq, in a lot of ways, you think of all the other stuff, whether it's Shazam or his rap albums or Steel or all the other things that he did, but I think they really tried with Allen Iverson, and this is where you saw folks like Steve Stout getting involved, and they had this sub aspect, or I don't want to call it a sub brand, but one of, I guess, their Air equivalent was Blacktop. So they had Blacktop as their sub brand, which is supposed to be a little bit more street ball and that mentality, which they feel like AI captured a bit more, and then the sneakers, and then AI leaned into it themselves with his personality and just him himself being a rapper too. But then the commercials that stick out, they had commercials for the AI and the A6. Do you remember those?
Oh, vaguely in the back of my mind. Yeah. How did they go?
So the A5 one, that was with AI and Jadakiss. So the two of them had a rap song that essentially was like into the commercial, and you saw AI, it was black and white. It was pretty cool. And then they did another one with his shoe that dropped the next year. But that A5 one was huge because that's the one that launched 2001. And then after that, AI gets his lifetime deal that he ends up getting from Reebok. And I think it worked really well for him because I still haven't seen an NBA basketball player outside of Jordan have a shoe that felt like it really had its own moment the way that Reebok did with Allen Iverson.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I guess what's surprising to me is that it didn't manage to carry through in the same way. I mean, I guess what stopped it from having the same long-standing impact that Jordan had on Nike? I mean, obviously talking about way different scale, but did they not like lean into that enough? I don't know.
Sometimes I was thinking about this before we recorded, and this is obviously a tough part just given Allen Iverson and his career, but I think a lot of us know that he's someone that his career also peaked in a lot of ways. 2000, 2001, he has that NBA Finals run. He wins MVP while the A5 and A6 commercials are happening. And at least in like my high school, that jersey went platinum. You saw that AI jersey everywhere. The sneakers were really popular too at the time. But AI, someone that by the time he was in his early mid-30s, he was a bit of a journeyman in the NBA. He was traded. He had a few good years with the Denver Nuggets, but by the time he was with like the Pistons and the Memphis Grizzlies, it was tough. And we also know that AI had some alcohol problems and things were always a bit challenging for him. And I feel like because he took so many hits from being this hip-hop forward and someone that leaned more into what they would say quote-unquote urban culture with the tattoos and the braids, people almost made him seem much more of like a pariah in some ways. And not only did he take the hits for that, I think we never saw AI become like a mogul in the way that like Jordan has. And I think even in the conversations you and I have had with Jay-Z, what you continue to do after the impact you make helps your legacy live on in a lot of ways. The fact that Jay-Z is just continuing to go up and up and up helps all the stuff that we talk about from him during the Rockefeller Records days. The fact that Jordan just continue to, be a billionaire and buy and sell the Charlotte Hornets helps the Jordan brand live on in a way that, I mean, we'll get to what Allen Iverson is doing now, but I wonder how much of that also hurt Reebok to some extent.
I mean, I would almost wonder if you could compare it to sort of, you could liken AI and Jordan to DMX and Jay-Z. Like at their peak, they were like just as high, and you could argue that at DMX's peak, he was even a little hotter than Jay-Z ever was at his hottest. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to argue that AI was ever like above Jordan or even really on that plane. But in that early aughts kind of moment,
he crossed him over though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I do think what made AI special though is that he tapped into an aspect of Black culture and being yourself and making people feel seen in a way that Jordan didn't. Jordan was very much a product of the 90s idealized Black man, not necessarily in a bad way, but I think that AI was more unapologetic about who he was, and he took a lot of hits for that, but I do feel like he resonated with people that Jordan never did. Thanks for watching Trapital on YouTube. If you enjoyed this clip, please make sure to check out the full episode that's available on our channel. And while you're at it, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll get all the updates on all the clips, videos, and breakdowns that we have on Trapital.